Okay, so here's third one in the series, and I'm going to keep this to 15 minutes, so we're going to go pretty fast. Competitive exclusion principle and resource partitioning. These two ideas are very closely linked, and I think you're going to see why in a moment. They're all about really how populations within a community work together to use the resources that are available in the most efficient way possible. If there was just one kind of animal in a community, say one herbivore that ate nothing but plants, and no carnivores around that would eat that herbivore, the herbivore's population would be rather out of control. All right. It might eat up all the plants, or it might have boom and bust cycles. So to use the resources efficiently, excuse me, you have to really have a balance of different kinds of animals and plants in the area, and that's really what we call community structure. Over the many billions of years that Earth has existed, more and more species have evolved that become more and more efficient within their habitat, their home area, at using the resources that are there. And so today we actually have a higher diversity of animals and plants than really at any other time in the history of the Earth, as far as we understand it. So we can see a couple of different community structures here that are on Earth today. Of course, on the left we have a kind of a subarctic community, one that exists in cold areas of the world. On the right, there's a tropical forest community, which could be similar to those here in Southeast Asia, but this one is clearly from South America because you've got the jaguar and the tapir included in that. Those are South American animals. So different communities with different structures, animals and plants, and often they're doing kind of the same thing, but they're in very different areas. The habitat of a community is really where it lives, and generally the habitat of any population within that community is going to be overlapping the habitat of other populations that are there. A community is simply defined by its defined area that it's living within. So all the populations there are within that defined area. As you might remember, the population distribution, though, could be quite different within that area, with some of them being clustered, some of them being evenly spread out or uniformly spread out, and others being random. So the habitat is the habitat. It's the whole area where they live. But the niche, or also called niche, is very, very important. And this is the role or job that the animals play within their habitat, within their community. And this is defined by the habitat itself, which is the overall place, the food role, whether this animal is or plant is a producer or a consumer, or what kind of consumer it might be. Its interactions with other species, competing with them or cooperating with them, where they reproduce. Okay, they may not reproduce in the same habitat. In fact, they may go somewhere else. And of course, their pattern of activity. Basically, how do they divide up the day in terms of being active more during the middle of the day, at night, or whatever the case may be. You could actually have animals that are, say, using the same food resource, but at different times of the day, so that they're not competing with each other. Ecological niche is a fascinating concept, and you can see it illustrated on lots of different diagrams on the internet. This one is a picture of water birds, okay, or also called aquatic birds. And these would all be living in the same kind of area on the edge of, say, a pond or a river in a temperate country. We can see that all of them are using different kinds of food. They're living in water that is at different depths, different distances, really, from where the food is located. Food is on the bottom, or it's floating in the water, or it's actually buried in the beach. So the birds have evolved in this case to kind of avoid competing with each other. And being all birds, they did actually have a common ancestor in the past. All birds came from a dinosaur ancestor well over 100 million years ago. So they do have a commonness in being all birds, but they're birds that do very different things here. So that's what we call competition avoidance, actually. Going down a little, next slide, come on. We have the question here of whether two species can occupy the same niche. And the answer really is normally no, definitely not inside the same community. So looking at this slide a little better, I'm sorry for the editing issue there. The aquatic birds, excuse me. Okay, sorry for that. So the aquatic birds here often are characterized by having long legs, at least long in proportion to their body size. And that's really going to go with their typical feeding depth. The legs are proportional to how deep their food is located. So this brings us back to this idea of, can two species occupy the same niche in the same community? And that's no, never. But what if you have different communities in different areas? Can they occupy the same niche in this case? Well, kind of yes. If we take a slightly deeper dive into this, and this material is not really going to be tested, but it's interesting, we can take a look at two famously similar looking animals called the sugar glider and the flying squirrel. The left one comes from Australia. The right one is actually a North American animal. But you can see how similar they are. They're both very, very distantly, hundreds of millions of years ago, related as mammals. But other than that, they evolved very different pathways in Australia versus thousands of miles away in North America. But they have basically the same niche. That's the interesting thing about it. They're not in the same community, so they can actually occupy a very similar niche, but in different places. This is an example of what we call convergent evolution, and you can check out this infographic for a little bit more about them and what they are doing there. But anyway, check that out if you have some spare time. Okay, so back to our main slides here. The idea of competitive exclusion is an old one and an important one in biology. It was originally formulated by a scientist from Russia named Gauss, and he realized that no two species can actually live in the same community, in the same niche. He did his studies on a group of microscopic organisms, which are shown in the pictures on the right side of your screen now, Aurelia and Caudatum. And he was growing these in little glass containers in his lab. They are single-celled organisms, what we would usually call protists. And he realized that the competition between these two was so similar that they would drive each other extinct if they were allowed to live in the same place very long. Eventually, Caudatum could not compete with Aurelia, shown in blue here, and the Caudatum would eventually disappear. This kind of competition occurs only in artificial situations. Normally in nature, you're never going to have two species that are trying to use the same food source because they've already evolved separately. They've already separated that and are living in different places or in different ways in some other manner. This idea of separation is a subset of the competitive exclusion idea, and the separation idea is really called resource partitioning, which you see in the center of your screen. The resource partitioning is using the resources there in the most efficient way possible, which then leads to competitive exclusion of the niche. Okay, so the niches do not overlap in any kind of way. You can see that in this kind of chart here, where we have two species which are artificially competing with each other. The example says hawks and owls, which would both be eating, say, small birds or mice. They would either drive one or the other extinct locally, or they would learn in some way to use different versions of that resource over time, and that is called partitioning the resource. The honest truth is you never find hawks and owls doing this because they hunt at different times of the day, all right? They actually have already evolved this partitioning, this separation, partitioning, to not compete with each other, although in the past their ancestors may have. One species may in fact go locally extinct or learn a new food source completely. So in this example, we're looking simply at seed size as a source of competition for some kind of consumer organism. So looking at this a little bit deeper, just another couple examples in here. Water hyacinth, Pak Top Chawa in Thai, is a plant that actually is well known for driving local plants extinct. This is a few pictures of Pak Top Chawa or water hyacinth around here. I'm sure you've seen this floating in canals and rivers here in Thailand. It's actually from South America originally. I think there's a map here on this website showing where it comes from. Yeah, its original range was actually in the central and northern parts of South America, but it has spread to almost all tropical and subtropical parts of the world. So when it goes into these new areas, it actually outcompetes many of the local floating plants that exist there. And that leads to extinction, actually. It's a kind of competitive exclusion. The water hyacinth niche keeps expanding, its habitat keeps expanding, its niche keeps expanding, and the niche scope or possibility of the local species keeps shrinking. All right, so this is a kind of invasive species, which is a great example of how resource partitioning actually could happen in the real world. The lower part of this slide is actually about chimps and how they have learned to use resources more and more efficiently. This is the evolution of intelligence. There's just a couple of quick links you can check out here on chimps that are fishing for termites, all right, as you can see right here. This is one of the most famous biologists ever, Dr. Jane Goodall, talking about how the chimps actually use different kinds of tools to grab the termites out of the ground. Okay, so back to our main slides here, and I've got about a minute or two left. One of the most obvious outcomes of resource partitioning and competitive exclusion really is the evolution of different finch birds, finches, F-I-N-C-H, on the Galapagos Islands. This was actually noted in very important parts of Charles Darwin's original writing on evolution by natural selection. And it's known well that these finches evolved from a common ancestor that went to the Galapagos. Now there's something like 14 species of them who are very similar looking except for their beak, all right? And their beaks actually allow them to try different types of food in these different areas. So they have come from a common ancestor. The common ancestor exploited different kinds of foods in different ways, and now we have different species as a result of that. The last one is really about the warblers. Okay, this is another famous example you'll find in lots of textbooks around the world. Warbler birds are also extremely similar to each other, and if you are a casual observer of them, they will appear to be using the same food all the time. But the fact is they take that food at different places on the tree, all right? So they have partitioned the resource in terms of feeding location, even though the bugs that they're eating might actually be the same bugs. So just the bug, unluckily, at the bottom part of the tree is going to be eaten by a yellow-rumped warbler, or the bug on the upper part of the tree might be taken by a bay-breasted or a Cape May warbler, all right? So they've learned to separate their feeding areas even within one single tree, and that allows more species to exist, and they become better at using those insects in those parts of the tree, so that raises the efficiency of the total system and creates a more stable kind of ecosystem as well. All right, so I think that's it for the slides. There is one more here on barnacles, which are also using different spaces on the rock, but that's okay. Let's leave it here, 15-minute YouTube limit. Talk to you in the next review video.